The story begins, as all haunting tales should, with a gathering around the fire. A small group had assembled in a quiet country house during the Christmas season, eager for ghostly entertainments. One of them, Douglas, leaned forward and declared that he possessed a manuscript, one that he promised contained a story of unusual dread, of children, innocence, and corruption, and of a governess who fought shadows not only in the corridors of a lonely house, but within her own heart. The listeners fell silent as Douglas began to read. The governess, a young woman of 20, untested in the world yet eager for her place within it, had accepted a post at Bly, a sprawling, isolated estate in the English countryside. Her employer was a handsome, worldly gentleman, guardian to 2 orphan children. Flora, a delicate little girl, and Miles, a boy away at school. He made his conditions clear. She was to take full charge of the children, manage everything at Bly, and under no circumstances was she to trouble him with any matter whatsoever. Lonely, but determined, she agreed. Her journey to Bly was filled with both excitement and an unspoken anxiety. She was stepping into a grand responsibility, and though her employer's indifference stung her pride, she clung to the idea that she might prove herself worthy not only to him, but to herself, at Bly. She was greeted by Mrs. Groves, the kindly as practical housekeeper, whose warmth quickly comforted her. And soon she met Flora, who seemed to embody innocence itself, with eyes that shone like clear waters and a laugh that melted away her doubts. The child's beauty, sweetness, and gentleness reassured the governess that her task might not be so heavy after all. The days passed pleasantly until news arrived. Miles was to return home. But along with the announcement came a letter from his school. The words struck like ice. The boy had been expelled. No reason was given. The school declared simply that it was impossible for him to remain among them. The governess's heart wrestled with fear. How could such a child, when she finally met him, be capable of anything wicked? For when Miles arrived, he too appeared, like a vision of angelic charm, handsome, clever, courteous, and altogether delightful. Surely, she thought, such a letter must be a mistake, or worse. A cruel slander. Her doubts, however, began to take root in quiet places of her mind. Bly itself was a strange house. Sprawling gardens, long corridors, windows that caught the moonlight. In unsettling ways, and corners where silence seemed to thicken. Yet the children, Flora in her innocence, Miles in his angelic poise, appeared untouched by any shadow, until one day, on the terrace, the governess saw him. A figure stood at the tower, high above, staring down in silence. A man, pale yet commanding, with eyes that seemed fixed not on her, but on something far more chilling. His presence was undeniable, yet when she hurried closer, he was gone. At first, she dismissed it as imagination, born of isolation and nervous fancy. But the impression lingered, carved into her memory with dreadful clarity. And when she saw the figure again, this time at the window, staring in with that same dreadful intensity, her fear sharpened into conviction. This was no mere intruder. Mrs. Groves listened with alarm. When the governess described the man, his sharp features, his dark hair, the insolence in his gaze, the housekeeper gasped. The description matched one she knew well, Peter Quint. But Quint was dead. The governess could no longer dismiss her. Visions as fancy, the estate itself seemed to breathe with secrets. And worse, she began to suspect that these apparitions were not random hauntings, but fixated upon the children watching them, influencing them, perhaps claiming them. And so, the battle began, not merely against phantoms drifting through the corridors of Bly, but against a corruption that might already wound its way into the hearts of the innocent. The days at Bly began to shift in tone, though at first it was only subtle. The governess still walked the gardens with Flora, listened to Miles's clever chatter, and felt herself drawn deeper into the rhythms of the house. But beneath the laughter of children and the comfort of domestic routines, she sensed something coiling, silent, hidden, waiting. Her mind returned again and again to the vision of Peter Quint, Mrs. Grose's trembling confirmation had both reassured and terrified her. She was not imagining things. The man had been real once, and now was real in another dreadful sense. But if Quint was indeed haunting the estate, why? For whom? The answer, she began to fear, lay in the children. It was Flora who first unsettled her. One afternoon by the lake, the little girl hummed a tune as she floated a toy boat across the rippling water. Air was calm, yet the governess felt a sudden chill, as if the reeds along the bank whispered secrets. She lifted her gaze and froze. Across the water, half veiled in mist, stood a woman. Her figure was tall, gaunt, clad in black. Her face was pale, drained of life, with eyes fixed intently on Flora. There was no sound, no movement, only that terrible stillness. The governess's heart pounded. She rose quickly, placing herself between Flora and the vision. But when she looked again, the woman was gone. Later, with voice unsteady, she described the apparition to Mrs. Grose, and again the housekeeper reacted with dread. The woman, she said, could only be Miss Jessel, her predecessor, the children's former governess. But Miss Jessel was dead too, carried away by illness and despair. Now the governess knew. Bly was not merely haunted by a solitary spectre, but by the corrupt Peter Quint and the tragic Miss Jessel. The thought grew unbearable. The children, innocent though they appeared, might be under their sway. The governess began to watch Miles and Flora with sharpened vigilance. At times, she thought she caught subtle exchanges between them, glances, silences, whispers that ceased when she approached. Once, Miles sat by the window, gazing outward with a strange intensity, as though waiting for someone. And once Flora slipped away to the lake without a sound, only to be found smiling dreamily at the empty shore. The governess confronted Mrs. Grose with her fears. They see them too. They know. They are in league with them. But the housekeeper, though troubled, could not accept such a thought. Children so angelic, so pure, how could they harbor such darkness? Yet the governess was not convinced. And Jessel sought not merely to haunt, but to possess, to draw the children into their shadowed world. The nights grew worse. The old house groaned in the wind. Candles flickered as though disturbed by unseen breath. Once, in the silence of midnight, the governess awoke with the dreadful certainty that someone stood outside her door. She dared not move, scarcely dared to breathe until the presence passed. By day she clung to the children, determined to shield them. She grew almost feverish in her devotion, her need to protect. And yet at times she doubted herself. Were her fears real? Were the children truly complicit, or was it only her imagination painting shadows upon their innocence? But every doubt dissolved when the figures returned. One evening, crossing the hall, she glanced up and saw Peter Quint at the stairs turn, watching her with that dreadful insolence, as though mocking her authority, daring her to act another day. She caught sight of Miss Jessel in the schoolroom, her black form bent over the desk where Flora had just been sitting, as if whispering lessons from beyond the grave. These were no dreams, no fancies, no fevered illusions. The governess's resolve. Hardened, she would fight for the children. She would save them or perish in the attempt. But still, the question gnawed at her soul. Did the children see them too? When she looked into their innocent eyes, she could not be sure. And it was this uncertainty, the mingling of love, terror, and doubt, that made her nights sleepless and her days. A battle between tenderness and suspicion. The shadows deepened. The screws, as Douglas had said in his preface, were being turned. Tighter, and at Bly, the governess felt the tightening every hour. The governess became more and more convinced that Bly was a battlefield, and at its very center stood Miles and Flora. It was not merely their charm, though both children were unfailingly beautiful in their innocence. Miles, with his bright eyes and quick wit, could disarm even the sternest heart. Flora, delicate and sweet, seemed like a living doll, full of laughter and grace. Yet beneath this perfect exterior, The governess thought she glimpsed something hidden in awareness to mature, too guarded for children of their tender age. One evening, she sat with Miles in the drawing room. The fire crackled, casting golden light across his thoughtful face. Hay looked at her with an intensity that startled her. "Why don't you send me back to school?" Hay asked suddenly. The question pierced her. His dismissal from school remained cloaked in mystery, a silence the Guardian in London had maintained, and which Miles himself never explained. Now, hearing him speak of it, she felt the weight of that secret pressing heavily upon them both. "I want only what is best for you," she said gently. He smiled faintly, yet there was mischief in it, something older than his years. "But sometimes, you see, I'm rather a fellow to be reckoned with." The words unsettled her. They seemed almost a confession, not of childish misbehavior, but of something darker. Something hidden in the very soul of the boy. With Flora, too, there were moments. Once, as they played by the lake, the governess noticed the child gazing across the water with a look of rapture, as though she saw someone smiling back at her. When asked what she looked at, Flora replied airily, "Only the pretty boat." The governess's heart tightened, for she knew that Miss Jessel had once lingered by those very waters. Her suspicions grew unbearable. She felt trapped in a riddle. Every gesture, every smile of the children carried a double meaning. Were they merely innocent? Were they willfully concealing a dreadful knowledge? At last, she confronted Mrs. Groves again. "They are not blind," she insisted. "They see them as I do. They're pretending, deceiving us both. The ghosts want them, and the children know it." The housekeeper wept, wringing her hands. "They're such dear lambs. Don't say it, miss, don't make it so." But the governess's resolve grew iron-hard. To save the children, she must pierce their silence, expose their secrets, and wrench them free from the clutch of Quint and Jessel. That night, she found herself unable to sleep. The moonlight spilled pale across her chamber, and the silence of the house seemed thick as fog. She thought of the children's faces, their smiles, their eyes, their laughter, and behind them, the shadowed figures of the dead who sought to claim them. For the first time, she prayed aloud, her voice trembling in the darkness. "God help me. Let me be strong enough. Let me save them." And in that whispered prayer, she realized her mission was no longer merely to govern, nor to teach, nor even to protect. It was to fight a battle between the living and the dead, a battle for the very souls of Miles and Flora. The next morning, Miles played the piano for her. His small hands danced gracefully over the keys, filling the room with music so lovely, so enchanting, that for a moment she almost forgot the dread in her heart. Yet as she listened, she became aware of Flora's absence. The little girl had slipped away unnoticed. Panic seized her. She rushed to the window, and there, across the lawn near the lake's edge, stood Flora, and beside her in the mist, the faint black outline of a woman, Miss Jessel. The governess flew from the room, her voice calling Flora's name. By the time she reached the lake, the figure was gone, but Flora's face, serene and smiling, was full of an innocence that seemed too innocent, as if the child had seen nothing at all, or perhaps, worse, had seen everything and chosen to hide. That night, when Flora lay peacefully asleep, the governess stood over her bed. The child's breathing was soft, her face angelic. Yet the governess trembled as she whispered to herself, "They know. Both of them know. And if I do not act, they will be lost." And so, in the silence of Bly, the screws turned tighter still. Asterisk, asterisk, the governess awoke the next morning with her mind made up. The suspense was no longer bearable. The secrets hanging over Bly could not remain in whispers and glances. If the children would not confess what they saw, then she would draw the truth out herself. It began with Flora. The little girl, usually so cheerful, had grown distant in subtle ways. She avoided long looks, shifted when the governess's questions, pressed too closely, and often slipped away when least expected. That morning, Flora asked to take her doll and play by the lake. The governess's heart froze at the request. "The lake, always the lake." "I'll come with you," she said quickly. Flora hesitated only a second before smiling brightly. "Yes, of course. Together they went down the path, the grass wet with dew, the air heavy with the scent of summer earth. The water shone silver beneath a pale sky, calm and deceptively beautiful. Flora knelt by the edge, adjusting her doll's dress. Humming a tune, the governess watched her keenly. Every movement, every flicker of her eyes seemed deliberate, as if Flora were not truly absorbed in play but waiting for something or someone. And then, as the governess's gaze drifted beyond the child, she saw it, there, on the opposite bank, cloaked in black and half hidden by reeds, stood the figure of Miss Jessel, the dead governess. Her face was pale as stone, her eyes fixed directly upon Flora. "Do you see her?" the governess demanded, her voice breaking with urgency. Flora's head jerked up, her expression startled not by the sight of Miss Jessel, but by the question itself. "See who?" she asked, her tone too light, too quick. "The woman, the lady. Across the water? Look, child, you must see her." But Flora shook her head violently, her face twisting in fear, or was it defiance? "There's nobody there. You're cruel, cruel to frighten me." And the governess reached for her, desperate. "Flora, you must not lie to me. She is there. She wants you." "I must protect you." The little girl burst into tears, her voice shrill, almost hysterical. "Take me away from her. I don't want to stay with her. I don't want her." The governess turned toward the reeds again, but the figure was gone. Miss Jessel had melted back into the air, leaving only ripples in the water. And when the governess looked back, Flora's tears were still flowing. But her eyes, those wide, glittering eyes, seemed almost triumphant. The confrontation shattered. The fragile piece of Bly that night. Mrs. Groves sat trembling at the governess's side as Flora refused to look at her. "She hates me now," the governess whispered. "She thinks me cruel. But better that she'll hate me than be lost to them. Don't you see, Mrs. Groves?" She did see. She knew Miss Jessel was there. Mrs. Groves sobbed. "Then what are we to do? What hope is there for the poor lamb?" The governess's voice hardened with resolve. "We must take Flora away. Send her to her uncle in London, away from this place, away from Jessel and Miles." At his name the governess fell silent, for she knew Miles remained in Bly, and where the boy was, Peter Quint would not be far behind. The next day Mrs. Groves departed with Flora. Leaving the governess alone with Miles in the great haunted house, the governess felt the air grow heavier, as though the spirit sensed her isolation. Every shadow lengthened, every creak of the old floorboards became a whisper in the silence. But she steeled herself. "It is here," she told herself, "that the final battle will come. I must be strong for Miles." That evening, Miles himself seemed restless, pacing the drawing room, glancing often toward the darkened windows. At last he spoke. "You're all alone now, aren't you?" The words struck her, uncanny in their maturity. "Yes," she admitted, "but not afraid." He gave a strange smile. "Are you sure?" Later, when they sat together, she pressed him at last. "Why were you sent home from school, Miles? What is the dreadful secret that no one will speak of?" The boy's face flushed, but his smile remained. "Is that what you want? My secret? My wickedness?" His words chilled her. Wickedness. The very word seemed drawn from some unearthly source. Some whispered influence. "Yes," she said firmly. "I must know the truth. You must tell me." Miles leaned close, his eyes glittering. "Perhaps I'll tell you if you'll only let me." And then, with a suddenness that made her heart stop, he whispered, "Peter Quint." The name fell like a thunderclap. The governess gasped, her blood running cold. "You know him? You see him? Cannot deny it?" she cried. Miles only laughed a high, eerie laugh that did not belong to a child. And at that very moment, the candlelight flickered, the air shifted, and from the shadowed window, the governess saw him, Quint's spectral face pressed against the glass, his eyes burning with triumph. The governess leapt to her feet. "Miles, now at last we must face him." But the boy only stared, wide-eyed, yet smiling faintly. As if caught between terror and fascination, the battle for his soul had truly begun. The house at Bly had never felt so silent, so oppressive. With Flora gone to safety, the governess was left with only Miles and with the unseen, lingering shadow of Peter Quint. Every hall seemed to echo with footsteps that were not hers. The doors seemed to open just enough to suggest someone passing through. The air pressed in as though the very walls themselves were watching, but the governess did not waver. She had chosen her role, and she meant to see it through. That evening, she sat with Miles in the great drawing room. The boy was restless again, pacing before the fire, pausing at the piano, tapping his fingers along the keys without playing a tune. She watched him with keen eyes. His face, pale and delicate, seemed to knowing, too thoughtful for a child of his years. It was as though another presence lurked within him, spurring through his lips. "Miles," she said softly, "I am not your enemy. You must trust me. Tell me what he asks of you. Tell me what Peter Quint wants." The boy froze. His back stiffened, his small shoulders tightening. For a moment, silence weighed heavy between them. Then he turned, his smile oddly bright. "Perhaps he only wants me to be free," he said. "Free," she repeated. "Free of what? Of rules, of lessons, of always being watched." His eyes glimmered in the firelight. "Perhaps he wants me to be myself." The governess rose, her voice firm. "No, Miles, that is not freedom. That is his lie. He wants you to belong to him, body and soul. But you must resist. You must stay with me." The boy laughed, a brittle sound that did not belong in such a young throat. "Perhaps I like him. Perhaps he makes me stronger than you ever could." The words struck her like a blade. This was no ordinary child's rebellion. This was possession, and as she stared, she felt it, the sudden, oppressive chill that announced the presence of the dead. Slowly, she turned her head toward the tall window. There. He was Peter Quint, his pale face pressed against the glass once more, eyes burning with unnatural fire, lips curved in a smile both mocking and triumphant. His figure glowed faintly as if lit from within, yet he cast no reflection on the glass. The governess gasped, her heart hammering. "Miles, look there. Do you not see him?" "What?" The boy's laughter stopped. His face went white, his eyes wide. For an instant, she thought he might admit it, that he might cry out in terror and see the truth. But instead, he whispered hoarsely, No, I see nobody." The governess stepped between the boy and the window, spreading her arms as if to shield. "Him, you will see him," she cried. "He is here, and he wants you. But I will not let him take you. I'll fight him until my last breath." Quint's eyes gleamed brighter, his smile broadening, as though he relished the challenge. He raised a spectral hand and pressed it flat against the glass. The room seemed to tremble, the flames in the fireplace flaring high, shadows twisting on the walls. Miles clutched at her skirts, trembling now. Don't let him," he whispered. Her heart leapt with desperate hope. He did see. He knew. "Hold to me, Miles," she cried. "Stay with me. You are mine, not his. Say it. Say you are mine." The boy's eyes darted wildly between her face and the window. His lips trembled, and then, with a sudden, piercing cry, he screamed, "Peter Quint, you devil!" The sound tore through the room like thunder. The governess felt Miles collapse against her, his small body racked with sobs, his face buried in her shoulder. She turned her head only to find the window empty. Quint was gone, vanished into the night. The battle had been fought. But had it been won? The boy clung to her still, shuddering, whispering broken words she could scarcely understand. The governess stroked his hair, her own tears falling freely. "You are safe now, Miles," she whispered. "He will never have you again, I swear it." But even as she spoke the words, she wondered, could a battle so fierce end so icily? Or had she only glimpsed the beginning of a darker struggle still to come? Asterisk. The morning after that dreadful night felt strangely hollow. The air was heavy, as though the house itself held its breath, as the governess had not slept. She had sat by Miles's bedside until the pale light of dawn spilled through the curtains. The boy had stirred restlessly in his dreams, murmuring words she could not quite catch, sometimes calling out names, sometimes hers, sometimes Quint's. When his eyes finally opened, there was no relief in them, no childish joy to greet the new day. Instead, his gaze was distant, almost haunted, as if something still clung to him in the shadows. The governess resolved that this would be the day of truth. Today, she whispered to herself, it ends. No more secrets, no more whispers. I will free him forever. She ordered the servants away, even Mrs. Groves, who looked at her with fear and pity but obeyed. She wanted no interference, no interruptions. This was between herself, the boy, and the ghost that haunted them that evening. She drew Miles once again into the great drawing room. The fire burned low, casting long, trembling shadows across the floor. She closed the doors, shutting out the world, and stood before him. Miles, she began, her voice steady but heavy with determination. I will ask you one last time. You must tell me the truth. What is it that Peter Quint asked of you? What is it he wants? The boy shifted uneasily, his hands twisting in his lap. His eyes darted toward the windows, toward the darkening night beyond. I can't say, he whispered. You must, she pressed, stepping closer. You must, because silence is his weapon. He feeds on your fear, your secrecy, but if you speak, if you confess, you break his hold. Suddenly, Miles rose to his feet, his small fists clenched. Then what if I do not want to be free? He cried. What if I like the power he gives me? What if the words stopped in his throat as though choked off by an invisible hand? His face twisted in sudden terror. His eyes flew wide. The governess spun around, and there he was. Peter Quint. Inside the room this time, not pressed against the glass, but standing tall in the far corner, his figure blazing pale in the firelight. His eyes were pits of darkness. His smile stretched wider than ever before. The governess's breath caught in her chest. She stepped protectively in front of Miles, her arms outstretched. Not again, she whispered fiercely. You will not take him. Quint said nothing, simply raised a hand as though beckoning. Miles gasped, his body trembling violently. He staggered toward the specter, as if pulled by a force greater than himself. No, governess cried, seizing him, clutching him tightly to her chest. He is mine. You cannot have him. The air thickened, oppressive, crushing. The flames in the fireplace roared, then guttered low, plunging the room into half-darkness. Shadows twisted along the walls, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to leer at them both. Quint stepped forward, his eyes blazing. Miles, the governess, cried, Look at me, not him. Say it. Say you belong to me, not him. The boy's body shook in her arms. His lips parted, and at last, with a cry that pierced the night, he shouted, Peter Quint, you devil! The specter halted, his smile faltering. For the briefest instant, his figure flickered, as though weakened by the words. The governess tightened. Her hold, yes, Miles, name him for what he is, cast him out. Miles screamed again, the sound filled with fury, fear, and despair, and then silence. Quint was gone, vanished, like smoke into the night. The governess looked down, heart pounding. Miles. She whispered. The boy lay still in her arms, his body limp. His wide eyes stared up at her, glassy, unblinking. Miles, she cried again, shaking him gently, then desperately. But there was no response. Small chest did not rise, did not fall in her frantic embrace. She felt the truth cold and undeniable. The boy was dead. The silence that followed was worse than any cry, any haunting. The governess sat frozen, clutching the lifeless child, her mind reeling. Had she saved him or destroyed him? Had she freed his soul from Quint's grasp, or had she torn it from his fragile body with her desperate struggle? No answer came. Ghost returned. No sound stirred in the hollow halls of Bly, only the governess's soft, broken sobs echoed in the darkened room, and thus the tale ends not with triumph, but with a question that would haunt her forever. Had she been the savior, or the destroyer?